Class A, is it true? Can it even possibly be? Are these our last set of notes for the trimester? Oh, well, we'll see. So these notes today go along with our previous 1, 2, and 3 reasons to use the subjunctive mood. So here is a 4th reason to use the subjunctive mood. So if these aren't directly with your other subjunctive notes, you should start your notes off with like something like this, or it should say another reason to use the subjunctive mood. And here we go. Reason number 4, to give advice, dar consejos, and make recommendations, hacer recomendaciones. There's an asterisk here because, well, we'll talk about it at the end. So this is what you do. Use the present indicative of the advice or the recommendation plus que plus the second subject and the present subjunctive verb phrase. This part is called the main or the independent clause, and this part is called the subordinate or the dependent clause. Here's an example sentence. I would like you to translate it. I have confidence that you can. Here is another example sentence that translates very similarly to the previous sentence, but it's phrased, I suppose, in a slightly different order. And I think you can translate that as well, because I'm about to tell you what some of this means. So to express these pieces of advice or recommendations, you may use these verbs. Aconsejar is to advise. Recomendar, to recommend. Sugerir, to suggest. And we use IOPs because we're advising, recommending, or suggesting something to someone. Here are some things to remember when working with indirect object pronouns. As always, you conjugate the verb for the subject. These verbs all work with /need indirect object pronouns. You need to make sure that the indirect object pronoun matches to or for whom the advice or recommendation is being given. Don't forget, if you want to clarify or emphasize an IOP, you must use a. See example 1. Here's my IOP. Back when we were talking about pronouns, we used to label our sentences. We would underline our subject. You don't have to do this. I'm just doing this for your benefit. Our subject and our verb phrase, because we wanted to make sure that we always conjugated our verb for our subject. Then we would box to or for whom something was being done. It's hard to draw with a mouse, so please excuse these crude drawings. So these two match each other. And in a subjunctive sentence, you usually have more than one subject. So what I actually have, I'm going to change colors for this, is a second subject and verb. You always make sure your verb is conjugated for your subject. Then we would also always ask ourselves if we had a direct object too, or what's being verbed. And in this case, it would be this. In this sentence, here's your subject, here's your verb, to or for whom. Then here is your new subject of the subordinate clause, the verb, who or what's being verbed is your direct object. You know what? I lied. A minute ago I said I didn't want you to draw the shapes, but I actually do. Just do it much more neatly, please. And I actually want you to label your items in your English sentence as well. So hopefully you skip lines, as you always should, so it looks nice and neat. So you are underlining your subject and your verb. You're putting a box around your indirect object information. You're underlining your second subject and verb and circling your direct object. As far as what to do with K, I know I previously had it underlined. I don't really know what to do about that. Maybe highlight it in a different color. I'll let you pick. Or you can always leave out the clarification or emphasis from the main clause and just state the subject in the subordinate clause after K. And let me move this out of the way. See example 2. In this one, we did not clarify or emphasize with al paciente. We just stated el paciente in the subordinate clause, and because el paciente is the subject of this part, we don't put a in front. You never put a in front of subjects. Hopefully this makes a little bit of sense. Otherwise, bring your questions with you to class. Now we need to talk about why there is an asterisk right here. Well, you may see these expressions, the 3, to advise, to recommend, and to suggest, followed directly by an infinitive in sentences provided by the book. But if you ever have to create a sentence, if I ever give you a sentence where you have to say someone advises to someone, suggests to someone, or recommends to someone, you must use K plus the subjunctive as shown in the previous examples. But here's an example of how the book says these sentences can also be written. The subject, the verb, to or for whom, the indirect object, and here is an infinitive phrase. Oh look, cat's out of the bag. There is all of the information you need to translate those previous sentences. And again, the doctor recommends to the patient. And then we have an infinitive phrase with a direct object, or what's being verbed. More water. Okay, so again, you can see that you might see in the book or workbook pages that these phrases are followed by an infinitive. However, if you ever have to create the sentences yourself, you're going to follow our formula here, which uses the present indicative, K, plus the subjunctive of the next verb phrase, as long as you also have a change in subject. So that's one way to give advice and make recommendations, but we have two more ways to give advice or make recommendations that we need to know about. One, super simple, easy, totally Spanish one, deber plus infinitive. And what do we know about this? Deber may be used in the present indicative or in the conditional, which if you recall from your conditional notes is slightly more polite. So you could say debes o deberías estudiar un poco todos los días. So you can use deber plus the infinitive, conjugated form of deber in either the present indicative or the conditional plus the infinitive. That's one more way to give advice or make recommendations. And then also just the conditional. When the speaker is putting him or herself in the other's place, you use the conditional to give this advice or make recommendations. And you can do that with colloquial expressions, which means not directly translated, plus the conditional, like from our conditional notes, yo en tu lugar, me in your place, I would, yo que tú, if I were you, I would. Or you can use the big girl, big boy, big kid style as opposed to the colloquial expressions with C plus the imperfect subjunctive, comma, plus the conditional. You could say, if I were you, I would blank. So refer to your conditional notes to see how you would find the imperfect subjunctive of ser to say if I were you. If I were in your place, literally located, location, which verb would you use? How would you put it into the imperfect subjunctive? Fill that in here, and then you would follow that up with the conditional to say I would. All you have to do to complete your notes is fill this in and this in, any of the boxes with the yellow around it, and you will be fine. We will do example sentences where we finish the statements with I would with the conditional in class together. Good job!